Welcome to another CXL Feed. I'm Pike, and in this lesson, we'll look at using BigQuery with GA4 data for free or close to it, at least for small and medium-sized businesses. One of the best features, in my mind, of GA4 is the connection that you can make to BigQuery. That's included for free. That used to be a very expensive option in the past. But I'm surprised at the number of GA4 properties that I go into that don't have that connection to BigQuery. I think there might be two reasons for that. One is people think it might be too complex to set that up, and it's really not too bad. The second reason may be that people think BigQuery is too expensive, because there are some horror stories around the cost of BigQuery. But I think most of those horror stories are myths. So let's actually kind of run through what the pricing looks like for BigQuery. We're going to start at the BigQuery pricing page, and we see that there are two factors that contribute to the cost of BigQuery, either compute pricing or storage pricing. Let's start with storage pricing. The main things you'd want to look at are the amount of active logical storage and long-term logical storage. And things will be in active for 90 days and then move to long-term. The cost looks pretty cheap, 2 cents per gigabyte per month, or 1 cent per gigabyte for the long-term logical storage. But you get the first 10 gigabytes for free. And if you're not sure what a gigabyte is, it's pretty similar to, just think of it as a gigabyte. So how do you find out how much logical storage you are actually using? Let's go right into BigQuery and look at an example of a data set from the Google e-commerce merchandise store. In BigQuery, when you make the connection to GA4, you get one table every day. This table came from January 31st of 2021. And the amount of total logical bytes is 19 megabytes. The active logical bytes are 0 because this is more than 90 days old. And the long-term logical bytes are 19 megabytes. So that's how you would figure out the difference between the long-term and the active logical bytes. But if you don't have BigQuery set up, you can't get this data. So let me show you some examples of two different websites, both on the medium size, I'd say, and let's look at what their cost would be. The best thing to look at here to compare this information to your website is look at the number of weekly users. These two, as I said, are medium-sized businesses, 81,000 weekly users for one and 100,000 weekly users for another. And you could also look at the event count to kind of get a feel for how the number of events in your website compare to this. But what I did was took 1 week's worth of data to just get a total of what the number of logical bytes were for that week. And we have, in one case, 312 megabytes of data stored in 1 week, and in the second one, 751,000. So let's go out a year. Let's assume that this is a representative week, and after 1 year, we'd have 16 gigabytes in the one case, and we'd have 39 in the other. And after 5 years, we'd have 81 gigabytes and 196. And the cost per month after 1 year would be 13 cents for the first one, or 58 cents for the second, and $1.43. Again, this is 5 years out, $1.43 or $3.72. Now, this is kind of a worst case scenario because my cost per gigabyte that I'm showing here is 2 cents. And that's the active. If you remember from our pricing over here, that's the pricing for the active logical. So let's actually change it to what it's really going to be. So it's pretty inexpensive, 71 cents per month or $1.86. Most people, I think, can afford that, particularly websites that are attracting this number of users. The other component of the BigQuery pricing is a compute pricing. And this is what happens with the queries that you're running against the SQL database that is BigQuery. So you get 1 terabyte free, essentially 1 terabyte free each month But after that, you're going to pay a little over $6 per tebibyte per month. So just to try to get a feel for what that means, let's look at kind of a worst case scenario. About the worst query you can run in SQL is a select star from wherever you're pulling the data from. And the select star just means, give me everything. I want all the data. So this is the most verbose, the worst type of SQL query you would run. And in this case, we have 534 days worth of data, and this is a fairly big site. So that query, giving me all the data for 534 days, is 47 gigabytes. Let's go back to our super duper spreadsheet here. And let's see if we put in a 47 gigabyte query, and that happens each time you run that query. Let's say we did that 10 times a day. Over the course of the month, we'd have 14,100 gigabytes. We get 1 terabyte essentially free. So over the course of a month, we'd be spending almost $82. Now that's expensive. That can be expensive and that can grow. But that is a crazy way to approach BigQuery because you wouldn't run those type of queries. That's the most inefficient query possible. So this is an absolutely worst case scenario. And in all the clients that I have worked with, I've never seen them come anywhere close to that 1 tebibyte limit of queries. And even if they go beyond it, it's going to be $6. So pretty inexpensive. Of course, there are fancier calculators than this spreadsheet I'm showing you. And let's take a look at the Google Cloud pricing calculator. We're going to add to our estimate. And because there are many options within Google Cloud, we want to look at the BigQuery pricing. The really key thing here is to switch to the on-demand choice. And now you can see, you can look at the amount of data queried in terms of tebibytes and the active logical storage also in terms of tebibytes. But we know that it's not tebibytes that we're concerned with on the active logical storage, it's gigabytes. So let's change that and let's say that we have 9 gigabytes of active logical storage. And notice that here you don't break it down between the long-term and inactive. And then the amount of data queried, let's say that's only going to be 1 or less. And you can see that our cost is 0. If we go beyond that 1 tebibyte of data queried, then our cost is $6.25. If we go up to, let's say, 50 gigabytes, now we're looking at $7.17. So you can see how maybe it'll start growing, but this is a lot of active storage. And again, remember the most of this moves to long-term storage after 90 days. So essentially, that's like 25 gigabytes. And in that case, it's $6.60. So what we can see here is that the most expensive option is the amount of data queried. And it's only in the very worst cases where you're running really bad, ugly queries that you might run into danger there. So wrapping up, I hope I've given you a sense that BigQuery is probably not going to be expensive, and it will probably be free for most small and medium-sized businesses. So if you're afraid that BigQuery is going to cost you a lot, don't be. You can see here that depending on your website, it may be very, very inexpensive, and you can run the calculator to get a feel for how much it might cost you. But don't let cost scare you away from BigQuery. There's so much value in having that connection. Go ahead and make that GA4 to BigQuery connection.